Hello and welcome to part 2 in a series of videos that I'm putting out this week where I break down all the fights taking place tomorrow night at UFC 241. I've already broken down the main event between Stipe Miocic and Daniel Cormier. You can find out the breakdown for that video in part 1, which I will leave a link to in the description below. And in today's video I will be breaking down the co-main event between Anthony Pettis and Nate Diaz, including a couple of other matchups. And speaking of Nate Diaz, I would like to give a big thank you to HLB Cormier for designing another absolute banger of a thumbnail. I actually think the thumbnail that he's designed might be the greatest thumbnail I've ever seen. Like, not just because I'm in it, because I hate to see pictures of myself, but it's pretty fucking good. Like, I appreciate the craft, man. I've used Photoshop for like 15 years and this guy's a beast. That thumbnail was special, so big thank you to you, mate. I really appreciate it, saving me time, and it is just absolutely amazing. Can't thank you enough. Also, just a bit of housekeeping. I will do the part 3 video tomorrow where I'll break down the remaining 4 fights. But after that, I'm going to take a couple weeks off. I'm going to Bali and Singapore for 10 days. So I'm going to take a 2-week break. Won't be able to do videos for the next card, which is the UFC China card in Shenzhen. So yeah, won't be around for a couple weeks after tomorrow's video goes out. Just want to keep saying that, you know, first rule of marketing is keep saying stuff until it sinks in, and that's just to stop you guys wondering where the videos are going to be over the next 2 weeks. I won't be doing them. And yeah, that's pretty much it. Just also want to say that the fact that I'm going to Singapore and Bali will not affect the website, my website, at all. I will still be fully researching the China card. I'll still be putting betting tips out to all my members, and I will still be doing live betting on the China card when I get back, so I'll be back in the UK by that time. The only reason why I'm not going to be doing YouTube videos is obviously I'll be in a different country. Can't rely on the internet connection being very good, and also I can't lug all my equipment over to the other country as well, so no videos. I'm going to take a couple weeks off, but I will be back in time for I do believe the next card I'll be doing is the September 7th card with Khabib and Poirier in the main event, and that feels like a million miles away, but it isn't. There's only, after tomorrow night, there's only one event in between the Poirier and Khabib card. There's only the China event, and then we're right on the UFC 244, so that feels like a long time away, but September will be here before we know it, and then Christmas and all that good stuff. So, that is it for that. If you do like the videos we've been pumping out this week, please hit the like button. Please also subscribe if you haven't already. It would really help the channel grow, and it would mean a lot to me. And I'm hoping you're going to enjoy today's video, so you'll want to hit the like button anyway. And now let's get into the first fight that we're going to delve into here in today's video. And I've just realised I haven't got up one of the fights that I want to cover. We're not going to get into that yet, though. Let's just move that along. Alright, okay. Let's get into the first fight that I want to talk about in today's video, which is Kang against Brandon Davis. Now, today's weigh-in was a pretty uneventful weigh-in. You know, there were a few guys that could have potentially struggled to make the weight, like Romero, but he actually looked better than he had done in his last few weigh-ins. I actually thought Romero looked okay today. I mean, we'll talk a little bit about that in tomorrow's video, part 3. But I would say in an uneventful weigh-ins, the one guy that really looked like they struggled to make the weight was Brandon Davis. And it's understandable, I guess, if we look at Davis's, history in the UFC so far. Came in the UFC in 2017 as a featherweight, 145 pounds, and every single fight since then, he's fought at featherweight, as we can see. All these fights are at featherweight. But then in his last fight against Randy Costa, after going 1-3 in his previous 4 UFC fights, he decided to drop a weight class down to bantamweight to see if, being the bigger man would give him an advantage. And that was a bit of a risky play, because at 5'10", he was a big featherweight, to be honest, at 5'10". Holloway's like 5'11". We know how big he is for the featherweight division. So for a 5'10" guy to drop down to the bantamweight division is always going to be a bit of a risk, because he is very big. And he did win this fight, but definitely struggled a little bit. I mean, he managed to win the fight against Randy Costa. You know, Costa was taking this fight on short notice. It was his UFC debut, but Costa was winning the fight. He was winning the fight everywhere. And then he just adrenaline dumped, gassed out, and Davis was able to use his toughness to take over in the second round and win the fight. But an unconvincing performance from Davis in his bantamweight debut. And like I say, if we look at the footage from the weigh-in here today, just a little bit of a concern, I guess. Didn't look great, in my opinion. You look at him facially here as he's smiling and stuff. Looks a bit like Skeletor off He-Man. Face definitely sucked in. Not looking the healthiest, not looking the worst either. I've seen much worse at a weigh-in, but you look at his face, his eyes, his face sunken in, very, very lean, not good is what I would say. Definitely looks like the weight cut to bantamweight is brutal for him, which is understandable for a guy who's 5'10". So just wanted to point that out because, Davis at 145 pounds in the featherweight division looked okay, but not sure if we're going to see the same from him in the bantamweight division, because one of the things that makes Brandon Davis a talented fighter is his toughness, his durability, and his chin. And of course, we know when fighters severely dehydrate their body to drop a weight class or to cut weight, that can have an effect on their chin. So with Davis's chin being, one of his biggest attributes, we'll be interested to see if his chin still holds up in the bantamweight division now that he's killing himself to make 135 pounds. And that's quite an interesting point to consider in this matchup, because I am sure Kang will test his chin in this fight. Kang, very technical, but hits very hard, very explosive. One of these guys that goes out and competes with a kill or be killed style. Very aggressive, very dangerous standing, and I'm sure that he is going to land big and hard on Davis and test that chin tomorrow night. It'll be very interesting to see if Davis's chin holds up. Now, this is a tough matchup for Brandon Davis because, like I just said, Kang, athletic, powerful, explosive, legit one-shot KO power in every strike. Throws a very diverse range of strikes. He's very technical, very, very high level on the ground, very dangerous submission game. Not the strongest offensive wrestler, but when a fight goes to the ground, he is very dangerous. That's one of the things that may save Brandon Davis here because, of course, Davis's biggest weakness throughout his career has been his ground game. Predominantly, he is a Muay Thai-based fighter. He is a volume striker. And even though Kang will have a huge advantage when if this fight goes to the ground, Davis's takedown defense is pretty good, and Kang's offensive wrestling isn't great. So it is unlikely this fight will go to the ground, simply because Kang probably doesn't have the wrestling to get it there. But if it did go to the ground, Davis would be in a lot of trouble. Now, if we look at the odds on this fight, we have currently got Kang at around about 1.50, which is minus 200 for an implied probability of 67%. So that's obviously a steep price to pay on Kang. And if we look at the odds on Brandon Davis, currently around about 2.70 underdog, which is plus 170 for an implied probability of 37%. So bookies are roughly giving Davis a 40% chance of winning. Now, the way I look at this fight is, if Brandon Davis looks like he did at featherweight and he keeps this fight standing, I do see this fight being close. I really do. Davis is a volume striker. He might not have the power and explosiveness as Kang, but he's definitely got the volume and toughness. So he did have the toughness at featherweight. If nothing's changed, I do think this will be a competitive stand-up fight. I'd even cap it at 50-50 if it stays standing, possibly giving a slight edge to Kang because I believe he's got the power to finish Davis, whereas Davis doesn't really have knockout power. He's more of a volume guy. But if it goes to the ground, Kang's got a huge advantage here. There's absolutely no doubt about it. And with the question marks over how Davis is going to look at bantamweight, that's why I do agree that Kang should be a favourite here. Maybe not as big of a favourite as this, but definitely should be the favourite with all those things considered. Now, is Davis worth a bet? Is Kang worth a bet? Well, I'm not interested in betting Kang, because like I just told you, if Davis does keep the fight standing, it's not too far off 50-50. And to get any value here, you'd have to cap Kang at 72% or better, which I can't get to in case the fight does stay standing. If we look at Davis, his odds roughly around 37%, which means you'd have to cap him at around 45% to get any value here. And I would only be able to cap him at that number if I knew that he was going to be able to perform at bantamweight exactly like he did at featherweight, and if I knew his chin would hold up at bantamweight like it did at featherweight, and if I knew that this fight wouldn't be going to the ground. And obviously we don't know those three things for sure, so at these odds Davis is a pass for me. I hope that makes sense. Sorry to be boring, but I don't think there's any value either side on this fight. I don't think Davis is a terrible bet if you really have a high risk tolerance and you don't mind gambling. There are far worse bets that you could place this weekend, but it's not personally for me. I don't think the risk to reward ratio is very good, and I don't trust that Davis will be as durable at bantamweight now that he's cutting all that excess weight, and Kang is a bit of a nightmare. So now we go on to the next fight that I want to talk about in tonight's video, which is Gabriel Benitez against Sodiq Yusuff, Super Sodiq Yusuff. And I am a big fan of Sodiq Yusuff. I think he's absolutely brilliant. I actually bet him when he fought on Dana White's Contender Series. Can you believe that this guy was a 3.0 underdog against Mike Davis? And I absolutely hammered him, max bet the shit out of that when he fought back on the Contender Series. Of course, max bet the small limits that bookies are kind enough to offer us on Contender Series fights. But yeah, did bet as much as the bookies would let me on Yusuff when he was a big underdog against Mike Davis. Of course, he came through with flying colours, and he's looked absolutely incredible ever since. But unfortunately, the price to pay for him being so good is baked into his odds. If we look at the odds at the moment, we can see that Sodiq Yusuff on most sites, currently around about an average of 1.38, which is minus 263 for an implied probability of 72%, which means to get any value on Sodiq Yusuff here, you have got to cap him up at around 77%, which is tough to do for anyone with so many variables in MMA. Sodiq could throw a leg kick and his leg could snap in half, Anderson Silva style, could get disqualified, could end up being a close fight and the judges could rob him. Maybe he's coming into the fight with an injury, maybe he'll get bad stress and anxiety before walking out, maybe he has an argument with his girlfriend which puts him in a bad mood, which impacts his performance. There's all kinds of stuff which makes it difficult to cap any fighter at 77%, so we've always got to bear that in mind. And yeah, Yusuff's a big favourite for a reason though, because he's very good. Now, Yusuff's gone from being a big underdog on the Contender Series against guys that most people have never heard of to now being a big favourite against established, talented and skilled UFC fighters like Gabriel Benitez. Benitez is absolutely no joke. He's very, very good. Trains at American Kickboxing Academy with DC, the guy in the main event. And he is a difficult puzzle for Sodiq Yusuff to solve. Gabriel Benitez, typical Mexican, tough, great cardio. And one of the things that I really like about Gabriel Benitez is that he's a very good counter striker. He's very good at fighting while moving backwards. We'll talk a little bit about that in the Nate Diaz versus Pettis fight coming up next. But being able to effectively fight while moving backwards is a difficult skill that not many fighters possess. But Mowgli, pretty damn good at it. He also has vicious kicks, vicious leg kicks, nice snappy body kicks, and not amazing boxing but not bad either. And like I say, like any old Mexican, cardio the fight at a high pace for 3 rounds, absolutely no problem. But this is a tough stylistic matchup for him because, as we know, Sodiq Yusuff, legit KO power in every strike, hits like a truck, great cardio, great chin, very tough, very technical. Will like to walk his opponent down, make the octagon a small place to be, make it uncomfortable for Benitez, and look to land his power shots and uncork those bombs. And while Gabriel Benitez is a very good counter striker, I do think this is a tough matchup for him because I just think Yusuff can walk through the majority of Benitez's shots and land the more significant shots, land the power strikes, the ones that are going to get the attention of the judges and be the difference. So while I do think that this is a winnable fight for Gabriel Benitez, I think if both guys show up and perform to their full potential, I do think Yusuff will win. But I think if Yusuff's not at his best on Saturday night, Benitez can definitely beat him. But I do see why Yusuff's a big favourite here. I wouldn't bet against him. He probably does win. Talented, young, hungry, up-and-coming fighters that are going to be making big improvements from fight to fight. They're not the kind of fighters that you want to fade. And I do see Yusuff getting it done. Again, like Brandon Davis, is there value on Benitez? Maybe a little bit, but you're not getting a good deal. For me, Yusuff's going to win this fight, and I think he's excellent, so I would pass on this one because you can't cap him at close to 80%, but at the same time, I don't feel like betting against him either. And now we move on to the main event, or the co-main event. The main event, though, that most people are interested in. There was a poll that someone shared on Twitter earlier where there was like, which fight are you most excited for? DC, Cormier, Diaz, Pettis, or Borrachinha, Romero, and I think Nate Diaz and Pettis had like 80% of the votes. So this is the people's main event, absolutely no doubt about it. And I've got a lot to say on the people's main event. I've got a hell of a lot to say, and I'm going to take a drink before I say it, because we have a lot to discuss. Oh, you actually might be able to see my t-shirt, the top of my t-shirt. Thought I'd been hiding it. You might be able to see it. I'll show you that in a minute. Right, let's get into it. I love Anthony Pettis. I absolutely love Anthony Pettis. Anthony Pettis is one of my favourite fighters of all time. He is one of my favourite fighters ever. I really, really like Anthony Pettis. If you want me to name my top 5 fighters of all time, favourite fighters of all time, he's up there. Anderson Silva, Michael Bisping, Dan Hardy, Anthony Pettis. I know the 5th is Pettis is in the top 5 though, for sure. 100%, no doubt about it. And I love Pettis so much that I've actually got a Duke Rufus t-shirt, which I'm wearing right now. I'm going to show up and show you this, just so you know this is all real. Check that out, boys. Duke Rufus Kickboxing, 1988, Milwaukee, Wisconsin. I'm actually wearing a Duke Rufus t-shirt, which, if you don't know, is Anthony Pettis' coach, long-time coach. Now, as you know, because you watch my videos all the time, I don't wear MMA clothing. I don't buy MMA clothing. I'm not an MMA fanboy. When I'm not working, I don't even care about MMA. I don't care about the news, don't care about the fighters. I just go about my business. It's like any job, right? When you finish work, you don't want to know about your work. But I love Anthony Pettis, so much so that I went on Duke Rufus's website and bought a t-shirt a while ago, a couple of years ago, and it's pretty good quality. It's holding up good, so thank you, Duke. But this t-shirt also, just to help you understand how much I love Anthony Pettis, I don't own any other MMA fighter merchandise. I have never felt the need to go and support any MMA fighter, but I love Pettis so much I bought a fucking Duke Rufus t-shirt, which is probably supporting Duke more than Pettis, but whatever, you get what I'm saying. And this t-shirt was incredibly expensive. You're probably thinking, well, what's the big deal? Like, you paid $30 for a t-shirt, like, who gives a fuck? Like, it's no big deal. Boys, this was an expensive t-shirt. What you have to remember is I ordered this from Duke's website in the United States. It took like 3 weeks to come. It was like $30, $40 for the t-shirt, but I'm in the UK, right? So then you have to pay another $20, $30 for shipping. Then you have to pay another $30, $40 on customs fees. So this t-shirt cost me about $100. I am not fucking around. I love Anthony Pettis. I need to drill that into you because I know I'm going to get a lot of backlash for what I'm going to say in this section of the video. But please know, a dude in a fucking Anthony Pettis t-shirt is going to tell you to bet Nate Diaz. I'm actually going to tell you to bet Nate Diaz in my Duke Rufus t-shirt. Now, I understand that's heresy. That is treachery. That is treason. I should have my head cut off or be burnt at a stake to tell you that you should bet against Duke Rufus's prodigy, one of my favourite fighters ever. While I say this in a Duke Rufus t-shirt, I'm going to tell you that I think Nate Diaz is a great bet this weekend, and I do. This is not a joke like I pulled in part 1 video with Rafael Assunção. I'm going to get into the reasons why I think Nate Diaz is a great bet. And the reason why I chose to put this t-shirt on, and do this little piece here is to try and illustrate the fact that when you are serious about making money from betting on MMA or any sport, you can't have favourites. I am a professional gambler, and money that I earn from gambling pays my bills every month. I can't afford to have biases and favourites and be stubborn over fighters who I like and dislike, fade certain fighters, love certain fighters, won't have a bad word said against fighters. You basically can't be a fan. You've got to be completely neutral, completely balanced, completely open-minded, and not have any confirmation bias, open to all possibilities. So here I am, a guy that has openly told you Anthony Pettis is one of my favourite fighters of all time, sat here in a fucking t-shirt that don't even look that great, that I overpaid for simply because I love this guy. Yeah, I absolutely love him. I love Duke Roufus. I love everything about Roufus Sport. And here I am telling you to bet against him. So I wanted to make that point. I hope you get it. And why is Anthony Pettis one of my favourite fighters of all time? Because I know that many people watching this video have only got into MMA since Ronda Rousey and Conor McGregor. They started promoting the sport to the masses and putting the UFC in the spotlight. And I am not one of these elitist wankers that has been following MMA, watching MMA for 15, 20 years, and they hate the new fans. I'm not one of these people that holds onto the sport like it's a baby, like it's my baby and no one else is allowed to love it. I think it's amazing that the UFC and these big stars attract new fans. So if you are a new fan, if you haven't been following the UFC for that long, and you can't understand why someone would love Anthony Pettis so much because he's just like your average run-of-the-mill top 15 guy, if you can't understand why I'm so passionate about Anthony Pettis, I recommend signing up to UFC Fight Pass, which is a brilliant platform, you know, for £5-6 a month, $5-6, whatever it is, it's peanuts. It's a great platform, it really is. I recommend signing up to UFC Fight Pass and going back and watch Anthony Pettis when he was in his prime back in the WEC days. Go back and check out Anthony Pettis in 2010, 2011, 2012, 2013, where he's running up the side of the cage, spinning, fucking back kicking people's faces off and cartwheel kicks and all sorts of crazy combinations and flashy shit. Pettis was the man. Like, Pettis was the man. Like, if you only know Pettis from like the last 2 or 3 years, if you only haven't been into MMA that long, get Fight Pass, go check old Pettis out. Pettis is a beast, and that's why I'm sat here in a Duke Roufus t-shirt. However, that is an important factor to take into consideration here, because many of the skills that Anthony Pettis built a career on, you know, the skills that enabled him to win the WEC and UFC title, they are not with him anymore. And, you know, at the end of the day, Father Time catches up with everyone. And even though Pettis is still relatively young at 32 years old, he's had, you know, 30 pro fights. He's been in a lot of wars. Hasn't looked the same since USADA came into effect back in 2016. And, you know, Pettis isn't the same guy anymore. That's all I'm going to say. Now, I've just told you that I believe Diaz is a very good bet this weekend. But it is important for me to point out that just because I say he's a very good bet doesn't necessarily mean he's a safe bet. Doesn't necessarily mean he is he isn't necessarily a bet that you should put a lot of your money on. Diaz is a very, very risky bet, an extremely risky bet, because you never quite know what you're going to get from Diaz. And this is one of those bets where there's a lot of risk, but I personally feel like the risk to reward ratio is worth it for the reasons that I'll go into in this breakdown. Now, the first huge issue, the first reason why this is a risky bet is obviously because Diaz is coming back into this fight on the back of a 3-year layoff, which is absolutely terrible. You know, it's not good. I've got certain rules in place where they're like general rules that prevent me from making certain mistakes. So, for example, I won't bet on 40-year-olds. I won't bet parlays. I won't bet on fighters who are coming back from brutal KOs. And another one of my rules is that I will not bet on fighters coming back after long layoffs. You know, another one of my rules is I won't bet on fighters making their UFC debut. I won't bet on fighters taking short notice fights. These are just some of my rules which help me save money over the years, help me from making mistakes, because in a vacuum, occasionally, a guy under those circumstances will win. But if you look at the data, if you look at the stats over a long period of time, fighters under those circumstances that I've just mentioned lose. A large percentage of fighters that come back after a long layoff lose. There aren't many 40-year-olds competing at the highest level of the sport for a reason. A large percentage of fighters, when they come back from a really bad KO, lose. So these are rules that help me. And occasionally, I break these rules, right? And, sometimes this works out for me. Most of the time, it blows up in my face and I regret it. But, you do have to occasionally break these rules. So, for example, 2 of the times that I've broken these rules this year that I can remember is when Viviane Araujo made a UFC debut on short notice against Talito Bernardo, and she was a huge underdog. I bet her as a huge underdog, and she won. Also, Mike Grundy was making his UFC debut against Nat Narimani, and I felt that Grundy was a great bet, and he won. He was a big underdog. So there are circumstances where I am prepared to break the rules. I just don't like to do it, and I don't like to do it very often. I am going to break my own rule here on betting a fighter coming back off a long layoff, but this is what makes it risky, Like, I always say that, you can find risk in any bet. You really can. You'll never get any bet to tick all the boxes, and that's okay as long as the risk to reward ratio is good. That's okay as long as the payoff is decent. Diaz is coming in this fight on the back of a long layoff. I'm fully aware that, he might look very rusty. I'm fully aware Pettis might dance around him all night and pick him apart and win an easy decision. I'm prepared for that. And that doesn't make this a bad bet if that happens, because we've established them as risk factors. All that means, if Diaz does lose, is that the long layoff did affect him. And at the end of the day, you have to have conviction in your decisions. And even though it's not ideal betting on a fighter coming back after a 3-year layoff, for the reasons I'm about to describe, I still think Diaz is a good bet. So, just want to make that clear so that you don't go placing a huge bet on Diaz. Because it's risky, man. It's risky, but he's an underdog. You know what I'm saying? It's okay to take these small risks on calculated gambles on an underdog from time to time. I do it very often. If you go to MMABettingTips.com/results, you'll see all the calculated gambles I've taken this year. Now, I actually went on a bit of a journey when I researched this fight, which was interesting, because as well as having no biases and no favourites, I like to go into researching every fight with a completely open mind, completely open to all possibilities. And when I go into, researching a fight, you're always going to have an idea of, how you think things will play out. We're human. It would be impossible to completely drown out the noise and have no opinion. But very often when I research fights, I completely change my opinion on how I think things will go when I start to watch footage. And I really went on a journey while researching this fight, because the first fight that I watched when researching this matchup was Nate Diaz's last fight against Conor McGregor. And while watching this fight, I actually thought Diaz looked pretty bad. And while watching the fight, I thought Pettis would probably be a good bet. In the Conor McGregor fight, I felt that Diaz looked slow, flat-footed, very easy to hit, and didn't do a particularly good job of cutting the octagon off and pressuring Conor. Tended to do it in bursts as opposed to, relentless pressure like we see from guys like Gaethje and Ferguson. Wasn't impressed by Diaz at all. And when I watched this fight, I could kind of see from my hazy memories of Pettis, I could really see Pettis staying light on his feet and picking him apart for 3 rounds and winning an easy decision because of how slow and easy to hit Diaz looked. And I remember I put it in my chat room. I actually think Pettis might be a good bet while I researched it, and got people like, oh my god, that's cool. I've already got a bet on Pettis, that kind of thing. And then I went away and watched some more fights, and after an hour or two, I came back and I was like, you know what? Actually, I think Diaz could be a good bet here. I've completely changed my mind because something really strange happened when I researched this fight. I didn't like what I saw from Diaz when I watched his recent fights against Michael Johnson, Conor McGregor, and Rafael dos Anjos. But when I watched Pettis' recent fights, I didn't like what I saw much worse, if that makes sense. Like, there was shit that I didn't like about what I saw from Diaz, but there was shit that I saw from Anthony Pettis that I really, really didn't like. And I think that's what makes this a good fight for Diaz stylistically, as long as he shows up and performs similar to how he did against Conor McGregor. So before I get into talking about this fight from a stylistic point of view, and why I feel this is a good bet for why Diaz is a good bet, I want to play you a little clip from Anthony Pettis at the open workouts this week, because I'm going to base my reasoning for betting on Nate Diaz on one specific aspect of this fight, which I feel will be really important. And whenever I talk about these specific aspects, I know that the majority of people watching this and the majority of people betting on MMA, you don't do your homework. You work from hazy memories, but you don't actually watch fights and do proper research when you make your betting decisions. So I want you to hear this from the horse's mouth, because if I hadn't researched this fight properly, if I hadn't watched all their recent fights, I'd have the same opinion as you. I would have the same opinion that Pettis would be able to stay light on his feet, be more technical, and pick Diaz apart for 3 rounds. If I hadn't have actually watched footage, I would have had that opinion. But I'm going to play this video to you now, because I know if I don't, there'll be loads of people in the comments telling me I'm wrong. Well, I want you to hear this from the horse's mouth, so that when I give this breakdown, you know it's coming from Anthony fucking Pettis, not from me. So, just want you to hear what he has to say here. And let me just pause my mic, and here we go.
Partner for me.
I think when people look at a way to beat Nate Diaz, there's the word leg kicks comes up and up again. Have you been thinking about that in this fight?
Oh, yeah. I mean, it's not a secret. I'm a kicker. You know, I'm gonna go out there and kick this guy until he falls down. And he's a puncher, so it's gonna be fun.
Obviously, a lot's been made of this being a
Okay, guys. So I don't know if you got that, but Pettis basically said, "I am a kicker. He is a puncher. I'm gonna go out there and kick this guy until he falls down." Now, I always knew that Pettis, with his Taekwondo style, is built around kicks. He's a predominantly kicks-based fighter. But it wasn't until I went back and watched his last 3 or 4 fights that I realised how average his boxing is. He really doesn't have any boxing at all. He's really just a single shot puncher. And all of his striking is based around his kicks. Now that is a huge problem in this matchup from a stylistic point of view, because the best counter to a kick is a punch in the face, and it's a hell of a lot easier to punch your opponent in the face than it is for them to land a head kick, because in order for someone to land kicks, they need time and space to set their kicks up. And I noticed that Pettis does need a lot of time and space to set his kicks up. He is quite flat-footed, doesn't use as much footwork as I thought he did, doesn't need to plant those feet and uncork those kicks. And when he is taking that, second or two to set his kicks up, he's wide open to eating a big hook or a jab in the face. And that's the range in which Diaz thrives. In order to beat a guy like Diaz, you need to be able to do one of 3 things. You need to be able to take him down, which, Pettis isn't really known for his wrestling. Diaz doesn't have the best takedown defense, but if Pettis did take Diaz down, Diaz is no picnic on the ground. Your other option is you have to knock Nate Diaz out, which is really fucking hard, because if we look at Diaz's record, he's had 30 pro fights, and in 30 pro fights, if we go through his record, Diaz has only been KO'd 1 time in his 30-fight career, against Josh Thompson back in 2013. If we have a look through his record, never been KO'd. 1 KO loss in 30 pro fights. So, take him down, no picnic for Pettis. Knocking him out, very unlikely. I know Pettis, KO'd Stephen Thompson in his last fight, but honestly, guys, he's not particularly dangerous with his hands. You know, I know again he knocked Ferguson down, but he isn't that dangerous with his hands. He doesn't have that much power in his hands. He just really doesn't. These knockdowns and knockouts are a little bit flashy, explosive knockdowns and knockouts. But in terms of actually hurting someone with strikes in boxing range, Pettis isn't that dangerous. And as we know, Diaz has got an absolute granite chin, as we see from the fact he's only been KO'd one time in 30 pro fights. Exceptionally impressive when you take into consideration the fact that he's consistently been competing against some of the best fighters in the world. Conor McGregor, one of the hardest hitters in the UFC, landed an enormous amount of punches on him and couldn't put him away. So, yeah, you know, unlikely he gets knocked out here. And then the third way to beat the third way to beat Diaz is by outstriking him, playing the role of Matador and just picking him apart, using his forward pressure against him to stay on the outside and keep him backed up, basically, prevent him from getting into a rhythm of coming forward. And before researching this fight, I thought Pettis would be able to do that. I thought that was Pettis' key to victory, because Diaz looked so slow against McGregor, with a really slow, plodding, flat-footed style. From memory, I just had visions of Pettis staying light on his feet, sticking and moving on the outside, just chipping away at Diaz with jabs, you know, the odd leg kick, and cruising to a win, really. But it wasn't until I started researching Pettis' last 3 or 4 fights and saw how bad his boxing was that outcome actually became quite improbable. Because it is very, very, very difficult to throw effective kicks while being forced to move backwards. There are actually very few fighters in the UFC who can do it. The best example that I can think of a fighter who can effectively land kicks while moving backwards is Edson Barboza, and even he needs a small window of opportunity to set his kicks up. He just is able to uncork them very quickly. Now, the interesting thing about that is even Edson Barboza throughout his career has struggled against pressure fighters. And if we look just over the last few years, he had trouble against Gaethje, trouble against Khabib Nurmagomedov, and also trouble against Tony Ferguson. You know, 3 pressure fighters that caused him big trouble. And throughout Anthony Pettis' career, pressure fighters have also caused him a problem. And that's simply because he doesn't have the boxing to back them up. When they're coming forward, he doesn't have the punches to back them up and stop them from coming forward. And because he's constantly being pressured, he doesn't have time to set his kicks up. And that's why historically he struggled against pressure fighters. That's why so many kickers struggle against pressure fighters, because they don't have the time and space to get their kicks off. And one of the reasons why Nate Diaz looked so bad against Conor McGregor was why? Why? Can you already guess what I'm going to say? What weapon did Conor have that he could use to cause problems for Diaz? Well, he had his boxing. As Diaz came forward, Conor's got heavy hands, good boxing combinations, fast hands, technical boxing to keep Diaz backed up. And the only time that Conor started to get into trouble was when he was too tired to keep his hands going and back Diaz up. That was why Diaz had so many problems in the second fight, because Conor could back him up with his boxing. But if Conor only had kicks, there's no way he would have been able to stop Diaz from coming forward, because Diaz would just walk through the kicks and light him up with his own boxing. That's what makes this a horrible stylistic matchup for Anthony Pettis. And another thing I'll tell you, boys, it shocked me how easily Ferguson was able to back Pettis up and trap him in bad positions against the cage. It really did surprise me. I always felt that Pettis was one of these guys, great footwork, light on their feet, great at circling away from their opponent, but not the case at all when I've watched his last 3 or 4 fights. Way more flat-footed than I remembered him being in his younger days. No real boxing threat at all. He's a kicker. He said it in the video I played you, boys. I am a kicker. Diaz is a puncher. And from experience, the vast majority of the time, when a puncher fights a kicker, as long as there's not a huge skill disparity, the puncher will win. Because like I say, the best counter to a kick, punch in the face. And that's really it. I mean, obviously the elephant in the room, the main risk factor with this bet is how is Diaz going to look after being out for 3 years. And of course, no one's got a crystal ball. No one can see into the future. No one knows how Diaz is going to look after such a long layoff. Usually fighters look very bad after a 3-year layoff, but Diaz is an outlier. He's a crazy guy. If anyone can come back from a 3-year layoff and look good, it's Diaz. And what I will say is this. If you looked at the weigh-ins today, Diaz looks in the best shape of his life. Like, period. Undisputable fact. Nobody can dispute that this is the best shape Diaz has ever been in. He's got abs, he's muscular, he looks absolutely incredible. I've never seen Diaz look this good. Diaz, everyone makes fun of Diaz for looking skinny fat. Well, Diaz looks the real deal. I know he's been out for 3 years. I know he didn't look great against Conor McGregor. There were some holes there. But he looks in the best shape of his career, at least from his physical performance. It looks like he's taking this fight very, very, very seriously. And for a fighter that has built a career on breaking opponents, fighting a guy who can be broken, has quit in the past. Diaz looking the bigger man as well. Bit of a size advantage here, just looks more physically imposing. Diaz at dog odds, I like it. And a couple more X factors to take into consideration are, like I say, we have seen Pettis quit in the past. He quit after the second round of his last fight against Tony Ferguson when he broke his hand. Kind of quit against Max Holloway as well, broke his hand in that fight, and basically looked for a way out, as much as it hurts me to say that, because I'm fucking team Rufus Sport all day. But yeah, Pettis does quit, and of course Diaz has built a career off breaking people and getting into dogfights and making it ugly. And the other factors, size advantage for Diaz, looking the best shape of his career, and also Diaz is from California. This fight is taking place in Anaheim, California, and I did notice that when they walked on the stage for the weigh-ins, the crowd booed Pettis and they gave Nate Diaz a big cheer. So home advantage is a little bit of a deal for Diaz this weekend as well. So if we look at the odds, this is one of those bets where it's fucking risky, boys. Like, a lot of people are babies and they don't like losing. And if you don't like losing, don't tail this bet because it's very risky. But I personally feel like it's a really good value bet. Don't go too big. But, if we look at the odds at the moment, Diaz currently around about, call it an average of 2.15, which is plus 115 for an implied probability of 47%. Based on everything that I've said, I'd actually cap him at like 60%. I think this is a 60-40 fight in favour of Diaz. There's a good margin over the bookies there on where I cap the fight. All things considered, stylistically, it's a good matchup for Diaz. He's very tough. Home advantage, size advantage, looks in the best shape of his career. Pettis has got a history of quitting. Pettis has got a history of struggling against pressure fighters. Doesn't really have any boxing. Doesn't really have too much power in his hands. Of course there are ways Pettis can win. Of course Diaz might underperform after being out for so long, but at the end of the day, that's why they call it gambling. You are never going to find a bet that ticks every box. And for me, at underdog odds, Diaz ticks enough boxes for me to bet him this weekend. And like I say, I think this is a really strong position to put your money. It does carry a lot of risk, but if you consistently get your money in strong positions over a long period of time, you will make a profit long term. And this is a bloody strong position. I love a bet on Diaz here. I absolutely love Anthony Pettis, boys, but at the end of the day, this is business, and I got to put food on the table, and I think Diaz is a great bet. And I honestly never thought I'd be saying that when I first started researching this matchup. So that is it for this video, guys. I hope you appreciate it. Let me know in the comments below what you think about today's video, what you think about the bets we've got so far on this event. I will be back tomorrow with part 3, where I'll be breaking down that Borrachinha versus Romero fight. And also, please show some support. If you appreciate these videos, please hit the like button. If you haven't already, please subscribe. It makes such a huge difference to the growth of the channel. and it puts a smile on my face every time I get a new like or subscriber. And I also love reading your comments as well. The comments have got a bit out of control in the last few weeks. I'm getting loads of comments, which I love, and I promise you, even if I don't have time to reply to every comment, I read every single comment, and you make my day. There's nothing I love better than when I've got a spare 5-10 minutes here or there waiting around, reading your YouTube comments. So please keep the comments coming, boys. I love you so much, and I'm hoping Sandhagen and Diaz can come through for us this weekend. And I also think I might have a third bet for this event. I'm not 100% sure, but I'm going to watch a couple more fights after I'm done with this video, and I might have a third bet in tomorrow's video for you, which could be quite interesting for a guy that seems to pass all the time, right? So take care, guys. Have a great night, and I will speak to you tomorrow.